read this, okay?
Mm-hmm. Just give it a quick once over. You might want to change some stuff. I'm not sure it's 100% correct. I had to do it really quickly.
No problem. Just do this and this. That's fine.
So remember, guys, try and keep everyone's answers and questions to like 1 minute, so 30 seconds, 40 seconds, 1 minute max. We're looking at around six minutes per topic here. So ideally, we want about 10 to 12 minutes of conversation, and then I'm going to edit it down to about 6. Okay, just to bear that in mind.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and if there's any background noise, you let me know, and my voice is getting really sore. So let's go.
Sure. Let's go.
Let me just see if it's actually recording. It is. Oi, pessoal. Welcome to the 5th edition of the Brazil podcast. I am Mauricio Savarese, an independent journalist from São Paulo. I'm a former Reuters Brazil correspondent. I think there was a pump in the middle, right? I am a former Reuters Brazil correspondent and also used to work for UOL, Brazil's biggest online news site. I also run a blog called A Brazilian Operating in This Area. The Brazil podcast brings together foreign and domestic journalists for a weekly discussion covering all of the biggest news from Brazil. This week's guests are James Young, who just a second. Where's the show here? I have to take the background noise off. Fecha. Não fecha. Puta que pariu. This week's guests are James Young, who writes about Brazil and Brazilian football for The Independent, Sports Illustrated, Rolling Stones, and others. He is also our first guest based in Belo Horizonte. Hi, James.
Hey, Mauricio.
Could you listen to the or not?
It didn't sounded okay to me.
It's because Brian is sending messages and that makes noise.
Okay, I didn't hear them.
Could you hear it or not? I'll have to do it. I'll have to do it again because if he keeps sending messages, there will be a noise. So, this week's guests are James Young, who writes about. I'll leave this conversation here because otherwise it will be impossible. Okay. So, is there background noise, Sam? Sam? Oh my goodness. Vai, Corinthians. Hello. Hello.
I'm here.
Can you hear the others? Sam?
No.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Yeah,
I can hear Sam now.
I can hear you saying the fuck's sake now.
Can you hear me better now? Is it better when I'm closer to the mic like this?
Yeah. It's working.
Oh, okay. That's what it is then. That's what it is.
Should I do it all over again? It's probably best. Can you hear any background noise where I am?
No, it sounds good, man. It sounds good.
Okay, so I'll start. Oi, pessoal. Welcome to the 5th edition of the Brazil podcast. I am Mauricio Savarese, an independent journalist from São Paulo. I am a former Reuters Brazil correspondent and also used to work for UOL, Brazil's biggest online news site. I also run a blog called A Brazilian Operating in This Area. The Brazil podcast brings together foreign and domestic journalists for a weekly discussion covering all of the biggest news from Brazil. This week's guests are James Young, who writes about Brazil and Brazilian football for The Independent, Sports Illustrated, Rolling Stones, and others. Well, I said Rolling Stones, didn't I? James Young, who writes about Brazil and Brazilian football for The Independent, Sports Illustrated, Rolling Stone, and others. He's also our first guest based in Belo Horizonte. Hi, James.
Hey, Mauricio.
Let me just take Brian out. Leo Macario, a film scholar and Brazil podcast regular based in Rio de Janeiro. Hello, Leo. Hello, Leo. Mas, Leo, cadê você?
I can hear Leo.
Okay, I can't.
Nor can I.
Hello.
Você não me ouviu, Sam?
Agora sim. I think I messed with people's mics here. So let me go again. Hello, Leo.
Oi, Maurício.
Our producer, as always, is Sam Cowie, a journalist based in Rio de Janeiro.
Hi, Mauricio.
Welcome, guys, to the 5th edition of the Brazil podcast. Our intro tune this week is Bezerra da Silva, Bicho Feroz. Okay, so can we go for the first one then?
Mm-hmm.
First off, this week we're going to discuss the concept that Brazil is winning the World Cup. First off, this week we're going to discuss the concept that Brazil winning the World Cup can actually be bad for the stock market. There are ideas circulating that Brazil's performance at the World Cup will have a direct effect of the elections. I think there was some background noise now.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was me.
I'll go again. First off, this week, there's two. First off, this week we're going to discuss the concept that Brazil winning the World Cup can be bad for the stock market. There are ideas circulating that Brazil's performance at the World Cup will have a direct impact into the elections this year. Guys, have you followed the news about that? I mean, every time President Dilma Rousseff picks a point or two in the polls, the stock markets fall. I suppose if Neymar gets an injury, the stock markets might go up at some point as well. How do you fare the whole World Cup politics relation in Brazil at this moment? Ooh. Okay, so should I aim this question at someone?
Maybe, yeah.
Well, I think you should.
Okay, would you like to discuss about? Would you like to talk about that, James? Do you think that's a good topic for you?
Yeah, I can give it a go.
That's fine. So, James, what do you make of this relation between the stock market and the World Cup?
Well, it's like everything connected with the World Cup. It's an incredibly complex and controversial subject, isn't it? First of all, I suppose the very practical effect of the World Cup, which, as I'm sure you've heard before, the amount of potential holidays that are going to be created by the World Cup, and following on from Carnival and the various extended holidays we've had in Brazil. We had that joke calendar, didn't we, a few months ago, talking about Brazilians working a very limited amount during the year. I was looking at something earlier that said during the Confederations Cup there was a 40%, a retail organization said that its members in Salvador suffered a 40% loss of income during the Confederations Cup, which is maybe not an entirely relevant comparison because it's much shorter competition, also competition that doesn't really bring in any foreign tourists. But it does go to show that if this talk of public holidays on game days and things like that, it's going to cut into working time. People are going to watch games. They're not going to be at work. They might be watching games at work on their cell phones. Productivity is going to be fairly low.
Mm-hmm. But you guys who come from Europe, you can definitely explain, Sam and James. Isn't pretty much the same in England or in Ireland or wherever there is a football nation watching the World Cup?
It is, yeah. Sorry, Sam, I'll jump in again. It is. I think it is the same, isn't it? And then you always depend on the kind of feel-good factor kicking in afterwards, and people going out and buying televisions and cars because they think the world's so wonderful now that their team has won the World Cup. And then there's the other thing they always talk about, isn't there, in Britain? I don't know if this is the same in Brazil, and I'm sure it is. They talk about barbecue products going through the roof, sales of beer, sales of sausages and hamburgers and so on, going up a great deal during the actual World Cup. But I suppose you want to talk about the actual potential results of effects of Brazil winning or losing, don't you, on the political and the financial?
Yeah, can I just butt in? So I think there exists this speculation that the World Cup is going to directly affect the elections, or at least that seems to be what's being paraded around in the international media anyway, or in parts of the international media. And I mean, it has to be nonsense, right? I mean, how can the result of the football World Cup, of the tournament, really sway the elections? I don't see that's the case. A finer journalist than me, I read somewhere else anyway that that the results of the World Cup in Brazil had never had any adverse effect on the election.
That's good. Leo, I can bring you in at this point. You have seen more World Cups and elections than all of us, and I like to make the joke every podcast. Have you ever seen World Cup results or whatever Brazil does on the pitch reflect on the elections?
Not really. I always think that people overreact to football results being used in the elections, and I don't think that really. I'm more interested in thinking those stockbrokers guys, they like to be linesmen or kind of a thing like that. Don't you think?
Well, my impression is that when you need to speculate a bit, you find all reasons to make decisions that look like market rationale at some point, but in fact, it's just sheer speculation. I can remember you, for example, in '98, Brazil had their biggest defeat ever in World Cup finals, and still President Fernando Henrique Cardoso got re-elected. In 2002, Brazil won the World Cup, and the opposition won the elections with Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. In 2006 and 2010, Brazil lost the World Cup, and the incumbents were re-elected. And I can't see any relation. Of course, people say, well, this is a World Cup in Brazil, and of course this can be different from other editions. But to my impression is we Brazilians are very self-sufficient when it comes to football, aren't we? We're going probably to blame Neymar, Thiago Silva, Felipão, and when it comes to the results of the World Cup, we're probably going to put it on Dilma and the state governors if they do terribly with the organization, even worse than they have so far. But if Brazil wins the World Cup and they have a terrible organization, I would say they will pin it on Dilma and the governors. But if Brazil loses the re-election, if Brazil loses the World Cup, but the World Cup turns out not to be a disaster, I think that's not going to affect them as much. And of course, the stock markets won't be happy about that, I expect. Do you guys have anything else? Sam?
Not so much, just that, Dilma's now 40% ahead in the polls, I believe, which is the same what she was in March. And I believe that's the latest results. And I can't see Brazil going out at an early stage in the World Cup having like a huge adverse effect on that. I can't see Acio Neves then jumping into first place because Brazil have made an early exit from the World Cup. Certainly, I certainly don't see Brazil making an early exit from the World Cup, to be honest. So, but I think this talk is I think this talk of the World Cup affecting the election, I don't believe in it. I think it's nonsense.
It's not only nonsense. It's a bit disrespectful with Brazilian people as well. If you think that people is so unengaged with everything, so why they are protesting so much? So that doesn't make sense at all.
I agree completely. But you guys, this week was also important for football and politics because local organizing committee member Ronaldo just endorsed the opposition candidate, Aécio Neves. Do you think that's going to play any role in the elections?
Do you remember in 2006, Ronaldo and Lula having a go at each other?
Oh yeah, of course. That was very elegant.
So that's exactly what I think. It's all water under the bridge, and it doesn't change a thing.
Mm-hmm. Just to remind our listeners and everyone else about what happened in 2006, President Lula asked Coach Carlos Alberto Parreira, whether Ronaldo was fat or not in the preparations for the 2006 World Cup, and Ronaldo implied that President Lula was drinking too much. So it was very elegant. We didn't see it as much. It was just an endorsement until the moment. But in years of general elections in Brazil, things can be very, very passionate and very heated, of course.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time that Ronaldo's said something a bit silly, which you later came to regret, would it?
No, it wouldn't. I mean, he's already said he's not black. He's already said he's made the comment about World Cups not being organized with hospitals. Of course, this was taken out of context as well, but still, he has to watch out a little more for what he says at this very particular moment. We have just a couple of weeks to go, and I mean, he was actually he did a good role in the local organizing committee. He went to the local organizing committee basically to soften the relationship between FIFA and the Brazilian government, and we can't say he didn't do that. But just to screw up in the end doesn't seem like a good idea. Should we move on?
No, let's keep it going. We got off to a bit of a shaky start there, but we also got some quite good stuff in. So, James, I'd like to hear more from James about the Ronaldo and Aécio Neves.
They're Minas Gerais politician, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sorry, that took up in the wrong direction at the beginning, going on with selling barbecue products.
Don't worry, buddy. Don't worry, buddy. It's all, you know.
I apologize. Trying to be practical rather than political. Well, where do you want to go back to? Do you want to go just on from Ronaldo and Aécio?
Yes, very much. They both made a big chunk of their careers in Minas Gerais.
Yeah, of course.
Neves was their governor, and Ronaldo started his career at Cruzeiro. They seem to be very close now. They've been friends for 15 years, and it's probably the first big endorsement Aécio Neves got for the elections. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't remember anyone with such a high profile just endorsing the opposition candidate at this moment. So how do you think this is going to impact on Minas Gerais and Belo Horizonte, the city you're based in?
Well, it's curious, isn't it? Because Ronaldo's fairly toxic at the moment. You could say because of his various blunders. I know he's getting a lot of criticism at the moment for coming out and saying that the World Cup isn't actually this wonderful thing. And people are saying, well, why are you saying it now? You've been working on it for the last 5 years, and you've only kind of noticed. They're using the metaphor of the 90th minute that you've noticed that things maybe are not so perfect. So, as you mentioned before, with the hospital's comment, the various blunders that he's made in his life, he's not seen as an astute political person, is he?
Not very much.
But then I suppose Aécio's problem is that Aécio is not a man of the people. Aécio is that's the big fault line, isn't it, in Brazilian politics at the moment, that you have Dilma and the PT, which is the time do povo, if you like. And then that's where they get all their support. Whereas you have Aécio, who's seen as a very capable politician generally in Minas Gerais. He's seen as being a successful governor and senator. So he probably needs a bit more populist support. And I suppose maybe Ronaldo is that not without wishing to patronize anyone, he is that kind of smiling face that people might respond to, I suppose. It's an interesting comparison, isn't it, with Eduardo Campos and Marina? You know, Eduardo has not an endorsement exactly, but he has got Marina on side, whereas Aécio has Ronaldo. So I don't know what you would think about that comparison.
That makes sense. He probably needs more political support than he has so far, and of course his party has a stronger base all over Brazil than the other opposition candidates, Eduardo Campos. But Ronaldo might be important later on, just to have an approach with that celebrity world. He has loads of contacts, and that can actually put Aécio closer to businessmen he hasn't had the contact with. I mean, Aécio is still a very local politician. He's had loads of success in Minas Gerais. He had a very discreet 4 years in Brasilia so far as a senator, and a national campaign trail is very different from a state one. And I suppose Ronaldo can help a bit, but I suppose the timing wasn't the best one, was it? I mean, he could finish the World Cup thing. It looked as if, well, I'm pretty much on the spotlight because of the World Cup. I'm going to endorse my friend, but then I'm going to take a massive vacation.
Is Aécio clutching at straws with this move?
I wouldn't say so. I would say it's not an organized thing. I would say, at least my experience with Ronaldo in the 2 interviews I made, sometimes he gets a little carried away and talks about things he didn't think he was to. The reporter who asked the questions to Ronaldo, our friend Andrew Downey, he's very good at asking those questions, and Ronaldo seems to have slipped a bit, and I think he's going to slip again many other times, and I think he didn't expect the kind of reaction, because that his commentary about being ashamed of the race, it made the headline of the highest selling national paper in Brazil, and no one can actually expect that when you're given an interview, can you?
Sure. I mean, but do you think it's a desperation move? Do you think it's a desperation move on the part of Acio Neves?
No, not at all. I would say that at this moment, at least from my political observations, he is very much looking into his way into the second vote with Dilma, and it's a second vote which is likely to happen, although polls suggest otherwise until now. And he's looking to be more of an oppositional candidate than Eduardo Campos, who was part of the government until very recently. And Brazilian politicians know that at this point, the only people who care about the elections are politicians and journalists, basically. There's a kind of a tradition that the election starts after the World Cup ends, and this time even more so, I suppose. I don't know if Leo has anything to add on that, but
no, it is, and it is not about the World Cup. It is more about the time of the year. They understand that here, this kind of thing, it's not decided on the first moment. It has to. There is so many things that are going at the same time, and things like that. They don't. They are not decided in the first moment.
Mm-hmm. That's my impression too. Should we move on?
Yeah, I think we should. Yeah.
Finish. Maybe it's we could also say it's not really a surprise in any way, is it? I mean, like you say, they've been friends for years, and it's been mentioned over the last couple of months as well, hasn't it? It's not necessarily.
I agree. I agree with you. That's the point. I mean, in Minas Gerais, those young Ronaldo years, the years Ronaldo spent at Cruzeiro, he developed a relationship with Aécio Neves. So it's not something. It doesn't take us by surprise, this move.
Yeah, that's my impression as well. Should we go to the viral graffiti?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
Let's do it.
Maurício,
shoot.
Só sobre isso, assim, eu vi o grafite agora há pouco. Eu agradeço ao Sam, que eu não tinha visto ainda.
É exatamente isso que a gente vai falar. É mais um viral lá fora do que aqui.
Ah, ok.
Também. Só olhei quando você falou no roteiro.
Tá no roteiro, não tá? Tá no topic 2.
Tá. Mas eu vi desse, eu vi no roteiro, não tinha visto antes.
That's the thing. I was actually reading Vincent Bevin's article, and I was just as surprised.
Só um instante mais, Maurício. Eu acho que as informações que a gente podia agradecer, assim, meu ponto, a gente podia agradecer ao Brian, que tentou participar, e incluir alguns pontos que ele levantou aqui, que eu acho que são bons.
Eu não estou vendo.
Na caixinha de bate-papo do roteiro, você viu o que ele escreveu.
Eu tive que fechar que estava fazendo
eu sei, que ele estava escrevendo. Mas era assim, ele botou alguns pontos interessantes. Ele falou para a gente citar que o Ibope deu um crescimento da Dilma em 3 pontos em maio, voltando aos 40%. Deixa eu ver mais o que. O stock market is not as important to the national economy as it is in
isso é importante.
The US. Exato.
Eu tenho até um comentário sobre isso que eu acho que talvez valha. Se quiser eu faço, mas é que na verdade as doações para a campanha da Dilma hoje vindas dos grandes investidores são o dobro na comparação com os outros adversários, né?
Mas aí eu acho legal você de repente até acrescentar, eu realmente acho isso. Você devia fazer uma menção ao Brian, que não pôde participar, enfim, problemas técnicos.
Mas ele vai participar semana que vem.
Pois é, já faz uma ponte com isso, porque eu acho que é uma atitude simpática, bacana. Ele deixou informações aqui sobre as coisas e tal, tentou participar de uma forma ou de outra.
How can we do that, Sam?
We can go back. We could just go back to the. I mean, I mentioned the thing about the Dilma results.
Yeah, but the Brazilian stock market, which is a good point he made, and the thing about commodities being more important here, and then we could just mention his name and add that he will be a part of the podcast next week.
Oh no, man, no, we don't need to do that, man. We don't need to do that.
Okay.
Don't worry. Yeah, don't worry. He knows he'll be a part of it next week.
No, it was not because of that. It was just
yeah, like a thanks for the points. Yeah.
It's because one thing I'm wondering is that we also invited other people who couldn't join in the podcast and sent things like Beth, for example. She sent things in the first weekend, and we didn't mention her as well.
We shouldn't get into the habit of giving shout outs. You know what I mean? We shouldn't get into the habit of giving shout outs.
Okay, if you think so. Okay.
Yeah.
I know nothing about. I know nothing about radio. I'm taking on board what Sam.
I'm against. I love the shout outs. I think they're great for everybody.
Man. Back. We used to do that with pirate radio. We used to love it.
Okay. So should we go for the graffiti then?
Yeah. So let's.
One suggestion I make to you all. We can discuss the graffiti, but it is actually a discussion on things that are a topic in Brazil and not a topic abroad, and things that are a topic abroad but are not a topic in Brazil. And one of the clearest examples I can remember is the one of Maranhão. Do you remember the case of the footballer who was beheaded? And it was massive abroad, and people asked me about that. I had no idea what it was, and in Brazil it was not a big story at all, but it was a gigantic one abroad. So
is this a doorway into talking about the foreign coverage of the World Cup in general, or have you already talked about that in other weeks?
I think we can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's do that.
So let's move on. Okay, now moving on to our next topic. Our second story for this week regards a piece of graffiti in São Paulo that has gone viral on social networks. The graffiti shows a young boy crying sitting at a dinner table. On his plate is a football. The implied message is something like, "We don't need football, we need food." And the picture has generated a tremendous amount of likes and shares online. If I'm not mistaken, 96,000 until this afternoon. First, I'd like to know from our international correspondent, had you seen this graffiti before? I mean, living in Brazil, I have the sensation that not many people here were very aware of it, and abroad it's become a massive success. And what do you make of this?
I think I saw it first of all on my Facebook feed, mentioned in articles in the foreign press before. I didn't really see it circulating on Facebook by itself as such.
Mm-hmm. Have you, James? Have you seen this particular graffiti recently on your social media?
I just saw it was the same. I just saw it on Facebook very recently, just today.
Okay, it doesn't look very viral to me at the moment, but Leo, have you seen that in your Facebook pages or on Twitter or on news or anywhere else?
And the first time I saw the graffiti was with you guys.
I think it's pretty unlikely that all four of us are that terribly informed about a story that we could actually profit from. We could actually write about it and sell it as freelance. Do you guys think that there are some stories some Brazilian stories which have become viral abroad and not as viral inside? Do you have that feeling sometimes when you're talking to your friends abroad that they know something about Brazil you don't, and that's because they have seen a piece of news or something on TV that wasn't even before your eyes until they showed you?
Well, I've got to say, with the protests, I mean, as we know, and as we talked about last week, in fact, a lot of the protests have been blown completely out of proportion. A lot, you have, as journalists, we have people contacting us all the time, asking for information on the protests and what's happening and all of this kind of thing. And we know for a fact that the protests really have, although they're still happening, we know that they really have dwindled. They've really diminished in numbers.
Mm-hmm. How about you, James? What have you gotten recently?
Yeah, I think I'll give you a little example without mentioning any names. I think we've all probably seen this, anyone who writes for foreign journals or foreign sites. The focus of articles, which don't always have an awful lot to do with the World Cup, being automatically turned into World Cup stories. And that, it's almost like there's a machine that creates the vocabulary. Almost like every article has to have the words casting doubts over Brazil's ability to host the World Cup, or adding to security fears over the World Cup. Almost every article you could be writing about organic tomatoes, and somehow it will become creating or casting doubt over Brazil's ability to hold the World Cup. So there is that incredible. Obviously, that's where the interest comes from. The World Cup, it's a global event.
Yeah, I would definitely agree.
Brazil didn't have that. The world wasn't watching Brazil before as it is now, but sometimes the microscopic focus on the World Cup and everything that might vaguely relate to it is a little bit troubling sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, I definitely agree with James there. I mean, it seems that you can if you can somehow relate a story to the World Cup, you can almost sell it anyway, right?
Yeah, it makes sense. Well, one funny story I remember from a few months ago when a New Yorker reporter came to São Paulo. He came to meet me, and we were having lunch. And the first question he asked was about a crime in Maranhão State, which is a very isolated state up in the north. And he was actually asking about the crime in a very tiny city related to two very very tiny sites. I mean, almost unknown, even in Maranhão, and it was a brutal crime. I think one of the referees was beheaded because he had stabbed a player. It was something like that. It was just an absurd crime. And then he asked us if that raised concerns for the World Cup, and my answer, I don't even remember if it was me or if it was someone at the table, but our answer was, if you just go to your cell phone now and type bizarre crime, some strange American state, I mean some very isolated American state, you're going to find a bizarre crime related to baseball or to American football or to whichever sport you like. And he did exactly that. And he went for Idaho, if I'm not mistaken, and he found a bizarre baseball crime happening just 2 weeks before of two kids spanking another one to death just out of sheer boredom. So when you have such a massive event coming, at least in the case of Brazil, because it's a country which is not as known abroad and it's not as known by international media as the U.S., it is rather comprehensible that they try to link any piece of news coming from Brazil to the World Cup, but of course that can make some bizarre results every now and then.
I think just to jump in, I think though generally as long as it's done constructively and within reason, I think it is a positive process for Brazil. I remember I think it was a couple of years ago I went on a government trip to some of the government-funded trip to some of the stadiums in the northeast, and we went to Fortaleza, and it was sort of 5 or 6 foreign journalists, and we were all sitting in the front row, and a couple of people from the Fortaleza World Cup, the governor and the World Cup local organising committee, etc., Copa, they were all there waiting for the questions. And the first question from all these earnestly liberal European correspondents was, what about the forced removals of people from their houses to build the access road to the Arena Castelão? And the look on the guy's face was just complete shock. He's going sort of like, why aren't you talking about a beautiful stadium? Why on earth do you want to talk about this? And you could see them look at each other and going, why are they asking about this? Because perhaps it isn't all that common in Brazil for certainly large scale media to ask these questions.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, you can maybe tell me if you agree with that or not, but I think some of the questions being asked are important, and then the criticism is important as well, because I mean, progress comes from criticism, doesn't it?
No doubt, I would definitely agree, and I would say that most correspondents who have come to Brazil, they have done a good work. Of course, if they have spent enough time and doing enough research on the stories they write about. But as
Not
these
everybody.
massive events, but as these massive sporting events do, they bring all sorts of people, and I can say I was one of those people in 2008 when I went to China. I spent no more than 2 months there, and I suppose I was full of misconceptions when I arrived, and I still keep some of them. When you spend such a short amount of time, it's probably not going to work as well as the people who have spent long enough to do good reporting and do proper criticism of the country. I completely agree that criticism is going to, Brazil needs to grow up in many senses, and criticism is going to help with that. But my impression is that some of the criticism is mistargeted. For example, when people talk about Manaus as a city full of spiders and snakes with a sub message, don't go there. And I mean, people can have better material as well to report, and I can be a media critic as well as I am of the Brazilian media as well, and as I hope people criticize my work as well. But I would say if when we come to the end of this World Cup experience and we have to put on a scale what was good and what was bad, I would say that the job of the correspondents here, at least so far, it has been way better than the ones of people who were writing from London or New York, or those who have spent a week in Brazil and gone back. That's my impression.
Mm-hmm.
Mine as well.
Leo, do you have any favourite myths? Any Brazilian myths that we've been talking about here, Leo?
Oh, I had too much of them, mate. Don't get me started on that.
I think I always, just to jump in, I always want to say to Brazilians when they get upset about things like, because we all know what newspaper we're talking about, don't we, when you talk about Manaus and the snakes and the packs of rabid dogs and so on. we all know this. We all know this newspaper, and you just want to tell Brazilians, look, I mean, that's that newspaper. Don't worry about it too much.
Very much, but that's the thing. Brazilians are so self-absorbed. They barely know the difference between The Economist and the Daily Mail, do they?
No, but then I suppose English people don't particularly know whether the difference between Aqui or Folha de Sao Paulo, do they? So.
Yeah, that's fine.
At the same time, we don't. We can't. It's strange because sometimes we can overreact about this violence stuff, and then we can also don't. I mean, violence is an important theme here. When you talk about somewhere in some state in the U.S. Being as violent as here, it doesn't surprise me at all, because those are two violent countries. They have violence in far too many symbolisms of them, and Brazil shares that with America. It's a bit strange.
Let me ask you. Too bad we don't have an American at this moment, but I would ask the two foreigners, because this is a curiosity I really have. Europe is pretty safe, so the murder rate in the UK is basically relevant, just as much in France or in Germany. And when you go to the US, it's a completely different scenario. My impression is that the American media, I wouldn't say it's more tolerant, but it understands a little bit more about the violence in Brazil, because it probably has some roots which are related to drug trade, a big business in America as well. My impression is that the American media still understands a little bit more overall about violence issues in Brazil than the European media, and that's not because the European media is meaner about these things, but they live in a different scenario, and they deal with the problem differently, and that somehow is reflected on the media. Would you agree with that? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I understand what you mean. I think it might be down slightly to the profile of the media itself, because the US media is a curious thing, isn't it? Because I mean, it's dominated from our perspective anyway by the intellectual media, you know, the Washington Post and the New York Times and so on. And then so that's the reflection we get. Whereas if you look at Britain, you do get the Daily Mail, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea what American tabloids are saying about the World Cup, for example, because they're just not very on my radar.
Mm-hmm.
To give you a quick example. Sorry, I'm being very rude here, but I wrote an article. I write for quite a lot of American publications, and I wrote an article about Recife this week for Sports Illustrated. I did some research about the murder rates, and it started off obviously with a long introduction about the police strike and the looting and the 27 murders in 48 hours, and then the supporter getting killed with the toilet bowl thrown at his head. So you have this very dark opening, but then as you go down, as you look at it statistically, Recife is according to a Mexican think tank, Recife is the 39th most dangerous city in the world. 36.82 murders per 100,000 inhabitants. But that makes it only slightly more dangerous than St. Louis and slightly less dangerous than Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
So that ties in with your idea of sort of the gun crime and the similarities between the two cultures in terms of high murder rates.
I think there's a tendency as well to not really illustrate like correctly what these murder rates are, because these murder rates, if we want to talk about Brazil and how Brazil has been portrayed in the upcoming, in the process of, with the World Cup. Sorry, let me start again. If we want to talk about Brazil and how Brazil's been portrayed with the World Cup arriving and stuff, there's been a lot of talk of like high murder rates. It's one of the most violent places on earth. This city is, that city is, but it's not really explained very correctly that these murder rates are happening in very select places. They're happening and they're also happening to very select people. It's almost always, a black male who is usually aged between 15 and 30, usually unemployed, and there's various reasons that this kind of violence will not affect tourists. And I think a clear illustration of that is lacking in a lot of press when we talk about violence in Brazil. Of course, tourists suffer violence, perhaps in terms of being robbed, being mugged. But in terms of tourist murders in Brazil, I mean, does anyone have any statistics? I mean, I think I imagine it's very, very low. I know of one situation in Lapa in Rio here. But apart from that, nothing springs to mind particularly.
That makes sense, and that shows a bit of. Sorry, say it.
Yeah, I was just going to say exactly the same thing. I mean, that's always very important. I put in the same article. They generally involve the poor killing the poor. Tragically, it's so important to make that clear, rather than just to say it's death and destruction everywhere you go.
Yeah, and it shows a bit of how our Brazilian media portrays the whole thing, because it feels as if everyone was just as much of a target, because they're subjected to, of course, crime as well, subjected to robberies and thefts. But the people who really suffer are actually in the outskirts, in the favelas, and in the isolated places of Brazil, where police and drug dealers seem to have no respect for their lives, and it is a different standard when it comes to tourists, because the tourists, of course, once the police has to deal with a crime related to a tourist, they know there's going to be massive media attention, and I suppose basically that they solve the solution rate is much higher when it comes to a foreigner or to a wealthy tourist visiting the northeastern beaches than it is with people in the outskirts of São Paulo and Rio. So the way it is portrayed is very different, and for international media, in a way, it's shown as if it was the same thing, but it's shown as the same thing because the Brazilian media does that as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Would you agree? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Do we have any more popular myths? I'm just trying to think of some. Some stories.
Popular myths.
Yeah, some stories that kind of did the rounds in the international press, which really had no bearing here. I mean, I can think.
Well,
One,
there
one, one
was
of them,
Mauricio's, sorry. There was Mauricio's favorite Carla, the middle-class American, with her steady
she's
cam.
back. She is back. Yeah, she's
Really?
back. She's coming to the World Cup. Of course, she's not going to report, but she's coming to the World Cup so she can enjoy some time in the limelight. Hi, Carla.
Is she really coming to the World Cup?
She's coming because she's going to report on all the terrible things that the World Cup has done to the people of Brazil.
Okay.
Who's that one?
That's good question. Good question. Exactly.
That's another viral abroad. It's another one which went viral abroad. It's a Brazilian American Californian anti-World Cup protester named Carla Dowden. She made that fantastic video saying, I mean, to me, of course, I'm joking, and I do have respect for whatever political platform she is in, but she's basically doing a very kind of conservative politics disguised in YouTube videos, and to my impression that she suggested a boycott in the Brazilian World Cup because there's corruption and crime in Brazil, and I think that's a very disengaging kind of politics in a way that says, well, you haven't dealt with that properly, so screw you, we're not going there. So she said she wasn't coming to the World Cup, but she is coming. She is coming to report on all the terrible things that the World Cup has done to Brazilians. I don't know if she's going to visit World Cup stadia, because maybe that's too much for someone who promised not to come to the World Cup at all. But she gave an interview to São Paulo magazine called Veja São Paulo, explaining she is coming definitely to the World Cup. Maybe another video is on the way.
We can only hope.
We can only hope. I can't wait to see.
Mm-hmm.
Can we move on, or have I gotten too ironic with this?
No.
I even stopped James from saying more about Carla because I got carried away.
I think
I have nothing to say about Carla. Absolutely nothing.
I don't know if this will make it into the show, but I don't know if I'll include this in the show. But I feel like I've got to say this anyway. Did anyone see this whole thing about the surreal? You know, this new currency that's being used in Zona Sul in Rio because stuff's so expensive.
I've heard of that.
You know,
when you go to expensive restaurants are really expensive, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. And there's this. I don't know. From my point of view, I felt there was this, this like watchdog, and it was like, oh, if you go to a kiosk on Copacabana, a portion of chips costs this much and a burger costs this much. Oh, it's an absurdo. It's an absurdo. But if you go to London, Maurizio, I'm sure you know this. If you go to London, I think maybe we talked about this. If you go to London, there are actual restaurants. There are plenty of restaurants that actually exist just to rip off foreigners, and they exist purely for that reason.
Angus Steakhouse says hello.
Exactly. And about half and a sizable portion of the restaurants in Chinatown as well. The ones that promise all you can eat for like £4 or something like this.
Yeah, all the dim sum restaurants. That's actually a good topic for next week. World Cup prices. Because I noticed that people complain too much about the World Cup price. I mean, not only the tickets, but they complain about the food. Can they just stop fucking eating for 2 hours and just watch the fucking game? Well, if you think that 8 reais is too much for peanuts, don't fucking buy it. Just wait, and you eat afterwards. You wimps.
Well, exactly. I think don't eat at the stadium is generally a good rule of thumb, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, who the fuck does that anyway, man? I mean, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
I mean, James, some British stadiums, right? You can't eat a pucker pie there, man. You'll get fucking sick and all sorts.
Exactly. Or then there's the Arsenal sushi option, isn't it? Which I've never been to it, but I've heard terrible stories about how much it costs to have a day out at Arsenal.
Yeah. Christ alive.
Well, I have one suggestion to these people. Go to Wimbledon and get some strawberry and cream. That will be much cheaper, I suppose. So, I'm being too ironic to this. So should we move on to Belo Horizonte then?
Yeah, let's move on. Let's move on to Belo Horizonte. Yeah, so James, this is your time now, mate.
Well, I'm just going to say, I hope you're all going to chip in, really, because there's not that much to say about Belo Horizonte.
No problem. We can talk about the atmosphere in the other cities as well. I talk about São Paulo, good. And then you talk about Rio, and you talk about Niterói, and we can talk about all of them. That's fine.
Okay. So is there a question or just dive in?
Sorry?
Is there a question or should I just dive in?
I will ask the question. I will pop the question. So.
Okay.
Lastly, this week we're going to talk about James. Lastly, this week we're going to talk with James, our first Belo Horizonte-based guest on the show, about the atmosphere in Belo Horizonte for the World Cup. So James, how is it coming along now?
Well, I have to say it's not especially visible so far. I'm not sure what it's like in other cities. There aren't a huge amount of green and yellow. I'm thinking of back home, green and yellow flags or banners hanging from the lampposts. People don't seem to be talking about it a huge amount. But then I've been told before that this is fairly normal. It takes a while for the sort of media storm to build up with the commercials and with Filipão and with the wall-to-wall news coverage, and then that's when people start getting excited when you get a couple of weeks away. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask, do you believe that after the Brazilian football season stops for a moment, which is going to happen next Sunday, that the World Cup atmosphere is going to pick up?
Maybe. Minas is famous for being kind of almost, not exactly anti-Seleção, but it's famous for people putting Atlético and Cruzeiro first, I think. Certainly a lot of Atlético fans that I know, a lot of Cruzeiro fans say they're not particularly obsessed with the Seleção and they'd much rather see Galo or Cruzeiro win something. So possibly. Also, I suppose there is this. I wonder to what extent just the fact that the World Cup isn't ready yet, and there's still this endless debate about what's ready and what's not, and when will it be ready, and sort of how many days or hours or minutes is everything finally going to be finished. Maybe there's that sense as well that while people continue to talk about the delays and the things that are overdue, maybe people still have a subconscious kind of block or something that won't let them dive into the World Cup. Mm-hmm. I almost said swimming pool. I'm going to say dive into the World Cup swimming pool. There you go.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And Sam, Leo, what's the atmosphere like in Rio? Has it? Just a second, background noise. So Leo, Sam, is the atmosphere any different in Rio?
We just started to see buildings showing Brazilian flags and changing the overall. The overall aspect of, we are not interested in the World Cup at all, and then we are already starting to see Brazilian flags all over the place, green and yellow all over the place. So as we thought it would be, it started.
Okay, Sam, have you seen anything different in Rio?
I can tell you, Mauricio, to be honest, to be fair, I've barely left the house. You know what it's like being a freelancer, right?
Very much.
No.
Pictures.
No, I'm joking. There has been, there's been a marked increase in the number of decorations. Yeah, a few more. Still not quite enough though. I was at Praça Sans Penha in Tijuca on Sunday, and no decorations there, which was a shame. Yeah. One
thing to notice or to point out as well is that Belo Horizonte is not the most demonstrative or the more flamboyant of Brazilian cities, so it may be a little bit slow when it comes to the festivities. I know it's the only, and this is a remarkable. I don't know if you're aware of this. It's the only World Cup city whose fan zone is inside.
Oh, really? Where is that?
It's in a huge Minas Centro, a huge conference center.
Oh, I see. I wasn't aware of that.
Which is a very bizarre decision. I'm not quite aware of the reason for it. It may be that, I don't know, it may be that they are, I can think of two reasons. One is that their post-World Cup sort of focus is going to be on making Belo Horizonte kind of a business tourism center, sort of because it's cheaper than Rio and Sao Paulo, it's got good connections and good facilities. So that might be sort of to highlight the big conference center they've got. or it may also be, if you want to be cynical, it may also be to keep the undesirables off camera. You know, I don't know if that's an issue or not. That's being very cynical, but you know.
Traditionally,
like yourself, James, or
It may be, yes, yeah, exactly. Maybe be ushered away into a corner and told I'm not welcome, you know.
traditionally, tourism in Belo Horizonte is most business-centered. So it's not that it's not that hard to understand that they will focus on that.
Yeah, that's too bad because it's a great city for bars. It's a great city to meeting people as well.
It's a wonderful city for that. It has a great pub tradition. It's a wonderful city to eat. Amazing food.
Yes, but an indoor fan fest that strikes me as being very depressing. You come.
It is depressing. But my impression is that if they wanted to keep the undesirables out in São Paulo and Rio, that would be also the case. But in São Paulo, it's going to be at Anhangabaú Square, which is a very typical World Cup place. It's a gigantic one, very open space. And in Rio, if I'm not mistaken, it's going to be Copacabana Beach, isn't it?
Yeah, Apuador, I believe.
Oh, I see. Well, it could be, because Belo Horizonte actually during the Confederations Cup had the biggest protest, didn't they?
It did, yeah.
And at the same time,
sorry.
And at the same time, Minas Gerais, Belo Horizonte had loads of fun. It had some of the worst protests and the Confederations Cup, and at the same time, the stadium was filled. And I mean, they did that wonderful thing with Tahiti. I don't know if you remember this.
Against Spain.
No, Tahiti and Spain was here.
Nigeria,
I was there.
Nigeria.
Yeah, Tahiti and
Nigeria. Yeah.
Nigeria.
They started the thing, and then I was there at the Maracanã Stadium when Spain gave them a thoroughly spanking 10-0, and we were having so much fun supporting Tahiti. But that started in Minas.
Yeah. Well, I think there's an argument to be made that Belo Horizonte is one of the cities that's benefited the most from the Confederations Cup and then the World Cup process. You know, the Mineirão was I think it was the second stadium to be finished. Wasn't Fortaleza was the first, and Mineirão was the second. And they had these the great games in the Confederations Cup with Tahiti, like you say, and also the game against Uruguay in the semi-final, which was a sort of really atmospheric, kind of euphoric kind of occasion. And then at the same time, of course, it coincided with Atlético and Cruzeiro having this incredible run of success with Libertadores and Cruzeiro becoming Brazilian championship. So meanwhile, Sao Paulo can't get a team into Libertadores. Rio football, Carioca football, the mess. So Belo Horizonte is really.
That is just
and let's not forget América Mineiro.
Of course, yes, yeah, Coelho.
The Rabbits is doing a great second division.
They are, yeah.
Well, that was just for one season because this year Corinthians might be different. Let's wait for the World Cup end. Well, what I can say about São Paulo atmosphere is that I've decorated streets myself. Too much background noise?
Yeah, say that again, please.
Yeah, let me go again. So, what I can say about São Paulo atmosphere is that I've decorated streets myself in 94 and 98, and we usually really leave it to the last minute because we know that the cars can destroy the whole decoration. I mean, if you just paint the streets and there's too many... Just a second. Oh, fucking hell. Let me go again.
Go for it.
So the atmosphere in São Paulo is pretty setting up.
There's a theory, isn't there? Sorry. There's a theory, isn't there, that I don't know what you think of this, that in the more in the cities which are generally not part of these big events, such as Natal, Manaus, probably Cuiabá, there tends to be more enthusiasm because there is excitement about being included, about being on the world stage, about being part of a big event, which they're not used to. Maybe that's patronising, I don't know, but I've heard that said in a few places.
That definitely makes a lot of sense. I've heard that from people living in Salvador and people who living in Fortaleza that the World Cup atmosphere has set in pretty soon there. What I can say about São Paulo is that it is not completely set in, definitely. One thing I can say as well is that I've decorated streets myself in 94 and 98, and we really leave it to the last minute because we know the cars can destroy the decorations just by driving through all the things we prepare for a whole weekend, and that could be gone in 2 days. So at this time, what people usually do is to get the money from the neighbors so they can actually start painting the streets on the weekend. So after the Corinthians Arena is tested again this week, and then the provisionary seats are tested, I think Monday is going to be an interesting day to check whether the atmosphere has finally set in, not only because it should be high time people start painting the streets, but also because the last big test for the World Cup events is finally finished.
Yeah, you mentioned the Corinthians Arena. That's the Arena de São Paulo, yes?
Well, Arena Corinthians, Arena de São Paulo. They have various names now. The only one I refuse to use is Itaquerão for the moment because that was not picked by Corinthians fans. Yeah. That was picked by a newspaper, so I don't use it. If Corinthians supporters start using Fielzão, Lulão, or anything else, I'm fine with it. But I'm not going with a name picked by a newspaper. And no. I'm going there on the weekend, so I'll probably have something to tell on Monday. Since Corinthians was dreadfully defeated in the first match they ever had in their own stadium, I'll go for the second one to see if they can actually score at home. I mean, in more than 100 years, we have never scored at home, so it should be our first. So, is this all right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think so. I think we've got enough to go on with there. Yeah.
That's good.
So, yeah. So let's wrap this up, guys. Let's wrap this up.
Let's do it. So
I think we've got about 45 minutes altogether. We've got about 45 or 50 minutes, so that's a nice amount of. I'll cut that down to about 18.
That's good.
Yeah.
So let me wrap this up.
If you can take out the line about diving into the World Cup swimming pool, I would appreciate it.
That's staying in there. That's staying in there, mate.
So let me wrap this up then.
Only joking.
No, go ahead. Don't worry.
Okay, so that's it for this week. Thanks to our guest James Young, Leo Macario, and our producer Sam Cowie. You've been listening to the Brazil Podcast. This week I'll leave you with Saco de Feijão, a success in 1977, sung by Beth Carvalho, composed by Francisco Santana. Is that fine?
That's good.
So let me
Wonderful.
end transmission.